Most profound serial killer, Jeffrey Dahmer. Jeffrey Dahmer, lying and tricking people with his innocent face, was a convicted serial killer and sex offender. Known as the Milwaukee Monster, Jeffrey had brutally killed and severed 17 males over 13 years. By luring his victims with promises of money, drinks, or sex, he would drug them through alcohol and kill them. Although the act is horrendous, but what comes next is the most shocking. He had an odd desire to fulfill sexual desires with the victims' corpses. Not only would he dishonor the dead bodies with his horrifying desires, but he would dismember all the body parts and preserve skulls, bones, or skeletons. Capturing Polaroid pictures of each step while murdering people was also a terrifying part of his serial killings. So this is the story of Jeffrey Dahmer, a man who seemed normal on the outside but had a terrifying secret. His crimes are so appalling that they remind us how sometimes evil can hide behind an ordinary face. Early life. Jeffrey Dahmer was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin in 1960. His father, Lionel Dahmer, was a chemical engineer, while his mother, Joyce Dahmer, was a homemaker. While some sources describe Jeffrey as a happy child in his early years, his parents' relationship was strained by frequent arguments and Lionel's long work hours. These tensions manifested in frequent relocations through Jeffrey's childhood, disrupting his sense of stability and making it difficult for him to form lasting friendships. A significant event in Jeffrey's young life was his surgery at age 4 to correct a double hernia. This procedure left him with temporary hearing loss, further isolating him from his peers. As Jeffrey entered his teens, his home life continued to deteriorate. His parents' divorce in 1978, when he was just 18, had a particularly devastating blow. With his family fractured, Jeffrey retreated further into himself. Around this time, his fascination with death and anatomy intensified. He began collecting roadkill, dissecting animals in his backyard shed, and preserving their bones with chemicals. While unusual for a teenager, this behavior could be considered a morbid curiosity. However, in the context of Jeffrey's troubled upbringing and growing isolation, it becomes a potential early sign of the darkness that would take root in his mind. Jeffrey's first murder. Jeffrey Dahmer's first murder cast a long shadow over the rest of his life. In 1978, shortly after graduating high school and enduring his parents' divorce, he lured an 18-year-old Stephen Hicks. Hitchhiking to a rock concert, he accepted his offer of having some beers at his house. What followed was a horrific act of violence that marked the beginning of a decade-long reign of terror. Jeffrey bludgeoned Hicks with a dumbbell, strangled him, and then dissected his body in his father's cabin. He attempted to dispose of the remains by burying them. Still, the act of violence seemed to leave an insatiable hunger, compelling him to exhume the body later, further dismember it, and scatter the bones in the woods. Killing spree. Following this initial murder, a chilling silence descended for 9 long years. However, the darkness within Jeffrey had not vanished. In 1987, he had already been relocated to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, to live with his grandmother. This seemingly mundane move marked the beginning of a new and even more horrifying chapter in his killing spree. With its transient population and areas frequented by vulnerable individuals, Milwaukee became Jeffrey's hunting ground. He specifically targeted young men and boys as easy prey. This deliberate targeting allowed him to exploit their vulnerability and lure them to his apartment with promises of money or companionship. Once his victims were lured back to his apartment, Jeffrey would approach the same method. He would often spike their drinks with sleeping pills, effectively rendering them defenseless before strangling them to death. This emphasis on control extended beyond the act of murder. Jeffrey would carefully document his crimes, taking Polaroid pictures of his victims at various stages, creating a twisted trophy collection of his evilness. As Jeffrey's killing spree progressed, the boundaries between violence and fantasy blurred. His actions became increasingly grotesque, fueled by a desire for complete control over his victims, both in life and in death. He began experimenting with necrophilia, a disturbing descent into a further violation of human dignity. The horror didn't stop there. Jeffrey's morbid curiosity led him to attempt cannibalism with his later victims. He even developed a macabre process he called zombification, where he used chemicals in an attempt to dissolve flesh and bones, creating a disturbing vision of a personal human possession. During the period between 1978 and 1991, Jeffrey had murdered 17 men. Living a double life, Jeffrey Dahmer was a chilling example of a monster in plain sight. By day, he could be your coworker, a neighbor you borrow sugar from, or the polite guy at the gym. He held down various jobs, including factory work and phlebotomy, often going above and beyond to appear helpful. Those around him described him as shy and odd, but not dangerous. This pretending allowed Jeffrey to trick unsuspecting victims into coming to his apartment. This is why he carefully divided his life into different parts, keeping his terrible actions a shocking secret. However, cracks began to appear. Neighbors complained about foul odors emanating from his apartment. Despite these close calls, Jeffrey managed to maintain his carefully crafted image for years. Arrest. On July 23, 1991, one of Jeffrey's victims, Tracy Edwards, was lured to his apartment with the promise of money in return for posing for nude photos. Because the apartment had a pungent stench because of the bones, flesh, and dead bodies, Tracy noticed a foul smell when he stepped inside. There were lots of boxes of acid, which he claimed were for cleaning. When they got into his room, he also saw some disturbing sights, such as nude posters, a creepy movie playing, and a large blue drum emitting a horrible odor. Suddenly, Jeffrey handcuffed Tracy and revealed his sinister intentions. He threatened him with a knife, confessing he wanted to take nude photos and even eat his heart. Terrified, but desperate to survive, Tracy tried to calm Jeffrey down, promising compliance to gain his trust. When he asked to use the bathroom, Tracy saw his chance to escape. He punched Jeffrey, knocking him off balance, and bolted out the front door. Tracy, with handcuffs dangling from his wrist, ran into the streets. He met 2 Milwaukee police officers and told them everything. He explained the horror he had endured, prompting the officers to accompany him back to Jeffrey's apartment. Inside, Jeffrey initially played innocent, but eventually admitted to restraining Edwards and brandishing a knife. The situation turned even darker when the officers found disturbing evidence: a large knife under the bed and Polaroid photos showing dismembered bodies. Knowing he was caught, Jeffrey tried to resist arrest, but was quickly subdued. The officers made a gruesome discovery in his fridge: a severed head, just one of many horrors hidden throughout the apartment. Further searches uncovered more human remains: skulls in freezer, organs in bags, even skeletons carefully preserved. It was a scene so terrifying that investigators compared it to dismantling a grotesque museum of death. After collecting the evidence, the police arrested Jeffrey. Trial. Jeffrey Dahmer's trial in 1992 was a shocking and widely followed event in Milwaukee. Accused of 15 counts of first-degree murder, Jeffrey surprised everyone by admitting guilt and skipping a trial to determine his innocence. Judge Lawrence Graham oversaw the trial, where discussions about his mental state took center stage. The prosecution argued that his actions were criminal and that he had control over his behavior. They described him as someone who carefully planned each murder to satisfy his dark desires. Forensic psychiatrist Park Dietz testified that Jeffrey's actions were deliberate, noting how he prepared for each killing and avoided witnesses. In contrast, the defense portrayed Jeffrey as a troubled man, overwhelmed by irresistible urges and mental illness. Their experts diagnosed him with conditions like necrophilia and borderline personality disorder. They argued that compulsions drove his crimes, and he couldn't resist due to his troubled mental state. In the closing arguments, defense attorney Gerald Boyle portrayed Jeffrey as a deeply troubled person driven to kill by sickness rather than choice. He asked for empathy, suggesting he was a victim of his own uncontrollable urges. McCann argued that Jeffrey's guilty plea because of insanity was an attempt to avoid responsibility, not an acknowledgement of actual mental incapacity. Ultimately, the jury found Jeffrey legally sane, ruling that he knew what he was doing and its consequences when he committed the murders. Jeffrey Dahmer received a sentence of life imprisonment plus additional years for each count. This meant he would spend the rest of his life behind bars without the possibility of parole. His lousy reputation extended beyond his trial, as he later faced additional charges in Ohio for his first murder. There, he also pleaded guilty and received another life sentence, ensuring he would never again walk free. Imprisonment. After Jeffrey Dahmer was sentenced, he was transferred to Columbia Correctional Institution. Initially placed in solitary confinement for safety reasons due to his notoriety, he began to receive letters and financial support from people worldwide, which he used to purchase items like cassette tapes, paper, cigarettes, and magazines. A year later, in isolation, Jeffrey requested a transfer to a less restrictive area of the prison. He took on daily tasks such as cleaning toilets and maintaining the gym there. During this time, he developed an interest in Christianity and requested a Bible, supported by his father. He engaged deeply with books on creationism. In May 1994, Jeffrey was baptized by Roy Ratcliffe, a minister he had befriended from the Church of Christ. They had profound conversations about life and morality. Ratcliffe later spoke of Jeffrey's introspection regarding the ethical implications of his actions and his spiritual journey. In a televised interview, Jeffrey reflected on the role of faith in fostering moral behavior. On July 3, 1994, Jeffrey survived an attack by an inmate armed with a makeshift weapon in the prison chapel. Though he wasn't seriously harmed, his family noted he seemed resigned to his fate in prison. Despite concerns, his mother Joyce maintained regular contact, though Jeffrey conveyed a sense of detachment towards his own future. Death. On November 28, 1994, Jeffrey Dahmer went to the prison gym with two other inmates, Jesse Anderson and Christopher Scarver. A fight started out of nowhere in the shower. Around 8:10 a.m., Jeffrey was found badly hurt in the bathroom after being hit several times with a heavy metal bar. He died an hour later from his injuries. Anderson, who was also attacked with the same bar, passed away 2 days later. Scarver, another inmate known for being violent and diagnosed with schizophrenia, later admitted to the attacks. He said he had acted because he believed God instructed him. Scarver said he hid the weapon before the attack and did not plan it. When Jeffrey Dahmer's mother, Joyce Dahmer, learned of his death, she expressed sadness and wondered if it brought closure. Families of Jeffrey's victims had mixed reactions. Some felt relief, while others still felt pain. Legal authorities warned against seeing Scarver's actions as justified, reminding everyone that taking justice into your own hands is against the law. Before he died, Jeffrey Dahmer said he didn't want a funeral and asked to be cremated. Outro. While Jeffrey's story is over, the search for answers and the quest to prevent such tragedies continues. We remember the victims and the profound impact this case had on Milwaukee and the world. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more videos. Until next time.